Okay. All right. Peace, everyone. Willfully, I can be heard. And if I can, just let me know, please. And if I can't, also, please, I would ask that you let me know with, of course, our customary one in the chat, please. I'll keep talking and then we'll see. Usually it takes a little while for everyone to kind of siphon into the space anyway. But definitely, if you are able to hear me, please give me a number one. All right. I'll just keep an eye out for. Okay. Well, I don't see any number ones, but I'm just going to keep going and then we'll see because they usually end up popping up later anyway. There's a chat up. The chat is up. All right, cool. Anyway. So thank you, Kiana. Thank you, Derek. All right, there we go. Yeah, so I guess that's because of the delay. Thank you, Roxanne. Thank you, Truly Feminine. We got ones. Yeah, so getting into it, right? I just want to do a live this evening. I did one coming into the last Sabbath, and maybe I can get some momentum going. As you all know, those of you who've been listening for a while, I tend to get a little momentum happening, but because I'm not a content creator, you might get a good solid 4 months out of me, and then I'll disappear for a year, and then come back. But I'm gonna try to maintain a schedule that works with my own desires for consistency this time. All right. But, the title of the segment, No House, No Future, right? And in a longer sense, why man, woman, and child still matter. So first, let me say Shabbat Shalom. We're coming into our Sabbath and definitely giving praise, honor, and devotion to the Most High. I trust that all of you are in a space where you're coming into this environment and this Sabbath with a sober mind, with a clean heart, with good intentions, and really in a space, which I think is always very important, where we start to remove the noise. There's always a lot of noise contending, for our attention, but we have to kind of think beyond the noise at times. The noise is a lot of chatter. And when you have your Sabbath and you have that 24 hours that you give yourself, it gives you an opportunity to speak, not necessarily, or to function not from a place of performance. You're not performing for anything outside of yourself, but you can come into a space outside of reaction, where you kind of can get yourself to a space where you're the way you were when you came in. Came into the last Sabbath. So I want to talk about something very simple this evening, in light of that. I'm talking about houses, I'm talking about homes, right? And when I say a house, I'm not just speaking about a building, I'm talking about, or an apartment, or, so just to be clear, we're not just talking about a physical edifice of an apartment or a building or some sort of house or a piece of land even, or even a physical structure alone. We're not talking about that. When I say a house, I'm talking about order, right? That's the most important thing that I'm speaking about. I'm speaking about divine order, and I'm speaking about responsibility. I'm speaking about a living arrangement of responsibility. Responsibility can be arranged in its own way so that it's living and it's functioning and it's fluid and it has motion, and most importantly in that, man, woman, child. Now, one of the reasons rather that I'm going to stress on this a little more, I had spoken about that recently, and there were some short clips that went out around me speaking about what's really honored as family. And as usual, and I sort of anticipated there were some concerns and questions that came into my inbox, even though I always say leave them in the comments. But, the human ego is an amazing thing. A lot of times people are just so afraid to be vulnerable in front of others, and I get it, sometimes. But, I'm speaking about a place where a child first learns what life is. Okay, so let's start there. When we're speaking about family, where does a child first learn what life is, what love is, what correction is, what discipline is? Starting from those places, and a child has to learn in that space what memory is, right? What spirit is, and what the future means, right? This is our genesis of what we would call family, right? And a lot of people might have slogans as far as I've heard a lot of them, the slogans and different symbols, that may typify certain things, and flags even that they try to use to define, familial groups. You can have historical references, all of those different things. And um, people might even speak about their ancestors with a huge amount of reverence, right? The last time that we had an opportunity to build with each other, that was one of the things that we spoke about. We spoke about the ancestral piece, and, really making a distinction between just taking in all of them and idolizing your egungun, or your ancestor, that ancestral society that lives in the invisible space, and idolizing that versus scrutinizing it and really taking a look at, okay, what needs to be carried into the future and what needs to be eliminated in my bloodline, in my lineage past. But like I said, you can have all of those different things: slogans, flags, historical references, great talk when it comes to ancestors. Oh, we look at them like this, and this is how we regard them. But if there's no house, there's no future. If there is no house, there is no future. All right. So let me make that very clear to you. A house is where the future is either protected or the future is broken before it ever gets an opportunity to step into the world. Right. So that's what the house is. A house is where the next generation first learns whether life has order or whether life is only a collection of wounds and adult fears and adult concerns and adult preferences, right? A lot of children, unfortunately, today, and I'm sure, I'm not just going to blame it on our generation or today. I'm sure this is something that's been occurring, but a lot of children are raised only under the auspices of different adult preferences or different adult fears. There's so many clients I work with at times, and one of the first things they talk about when they talk about their children is, I don't want them to go through what I had to go through, or I want them to have what I didn't have, right? So you sometimes have these adults that are living in this fear model and this deficit model, and they're forming their children under that model. So I want to speak about the house, right? And the healthiness of the house. And when I say house, again, I'm not speaking about reducing family to an emotional idea. It's one of the things that I spoke about recently, in the video, but, or reducing family to a somatic or a romantic or an intimate arrangement or a blood relation that people claim whenever it's convenient. I'm more so speaking about family from the perspective of dignity, from the perspective of royalty, family as a name that can be carried with honor. When you say your family name, when I say Assaan-ANU, and we form, like Voltron, is a certain honor that comes with that, right? So that's what I'm speaking about, family as a crest. Now what's a crest? A crest is a standard. Right. So when you look at House of Yuya, my family, there's a family crest, which now provides a spiritual jurisdiction, right? That's very important. It provides a spiritual jurisdiction. It provides an environment and a form that can never be handled cheaply. Can't be handled cheaply. That's something really important to understand, man. And that may be a form or a jurisdiction in a familial sense that's not necessarily understood by the world. And that's cool. Don't sweat that. For me, there's a certain in my culture, there's a certain perspective that we have on maybe what the West or the Anglosphere perceives as what family is, or what marriage is, or even with the rights, marital rights, or parental rights and things like that. Ours, of course, are shaped by our spiritual doctrine first. So we're first going to go to Torah. We're going to go to the Quran. We're going to go to the ancient books of our forefathers and our foremothers, right? And then we're gonna learn our jurisdiction from there. So that's not a cheap way to handle family. Some people are very reckless in the way that they handle family, whether the way they propose to create one or whether they propose to destroy one. They handle it in a very cheap way. But when you're really focusing on that perspective of family, right, you're handling it in a dignified and royal way, because a house is not necessarily just where people live. A house is what those people represent, right? So when you say House of Yuya, I'm going to keep using my family as the reference. I'm going to make myself the subject of the research, if you will. But feel free to make yourself as well. But when you say House of Yuya, you're not speaking about where House of Yuya is. You're speaking about what House of Yuya be, what House of Yuya do. So it's the name that carries, it carries itself into the world, a certain code of conduct that's exported and it's maintained, right? So it's almost like the name itself becomes a commodity. It becomes that key, or like I spoke about before, it becomes that shield and that umbrella. When a person belongs to a house, they shouldn't necessarily live as if their life has no witness. That's a huge mistake, right? Their behavior is either going to dignify the house or is going to bring dishonor to the house, right? Some of you may be old enough to remember when maybe you were caught doing certain things in the neighborhood, or you were around certain other young people, and it would be maybe an older person would say something like, now, your father wouldn't want you doing that. Or your mother wouldn't want you. Come from a good family. What are you doing? Right? So that because your family is known, your family shield, that crest is known, it's like, no, your family represents this. You're not supposed to be involved in that or bring that kind of dishonor. And that's why we have to bring a certain seriousness around house language, right? And that's why I wanted to really make the distinction early on that I'm not speaking about your physical house, right? Because you can live in the most beautiful home in your county and not necessarily take the dignity and the royalty of your family in a serious way, right? So a house should never be considered as a casual gathering of people, right? A house is not just a gathering of people who like each other. That's too easy. That's cheap. That's low hanging fruit. That's too cheap. It's not just romance with children attached to it, right? I like you, you like me, you cute, you handsome, let's go make some babies. And now we got a house, we got a family, right? That's cheap. When I speak about handling the home in a cheap manner, that's cheap, right? It has to be a standard, which signifies it's a place where a man, woman, and child. You notice I'm gonna keep saying man, woman, child. And shalom, Master Menelec. Peace. Good to see you. I'm gonna try this time. I'm glancing over. I have the chat on the screen here, so you notice I keep looking over. I'm I'm going to try to acknowledge the chat as we go on. And there's a reason I'm going to tell you why for that later. But it's a place where man, woman, and child are given form. They're given form, but not only are they given form inside of a house, they're given direction inside of a house, right? They're given protection inside of a house. Sometimes, unfortunately, that's the only part that we sort of put focus on. You go inside the house for shelter. When we talk about, food, clothing, and shelter, we look at the house only as a place for sheltering. But if house is a place for correction, right? You might have had those experiences. I bet at least one or two of you have. When you were young, I know I have, and I still promote that. Like I've told people I care about dearly, if we outside and you're wrong, I got your back, right? We'll go to the tilt. Whatever we got to do, I got your back. If you're right, I got your back. Now, when we get home, I'm going to deal with you, right? So like I've always told my youth that, man, when we out, man, you don't have to, if you right, if you in the right, Abba's got your back. If you're in the wrong, Abba's got your back. But when we get back home, I'm going to rain down on you if you were wrong, because the house is where you receive your correction. The house is where you receive your protection. Always remember, those who you let reward you or let punish you are those who you let define you. You see, that's who defines you. That sometimes gives you a clue of who your family is, and I'm saying this also for the men. When you're in a situation with a woman and you go to correct her and say, hey, no, you put a boundary up and she's resistant, even if she's passively resistant, she's letting you know right there, like, I'm not letting you form me. I'm not letting you form me, right? So therefore, I'm not your rib. And I know that sometimes stuff like that is a little tough to deal with. But when a house is ordered, it gives the people inside of it a sense of rank. It gives them a sense of place. And most importantly, it gives them a sense of sacred responsibility when your house is properly ordered. You ever notice how children love to have something that's for them, and they'll fight over what's for them? If you say, hey, it's your job to sweep the steps, or, it's your job to set the table or whatever, that's my job. That's what I'm supposed to do. They'll tell on it. Can you tell him to stop? That's for me. Because that responsibility is sacred. I remember as a youth, holding the flashlight for my father was a sacred responsibility. When he was working on his car or he was looking at something, he always seemed to call me, right? And in a very subtle sense, I probably would have felt the way if he called one of my other siblings to like come hold a flashlight. I would have probably like, what did I do wrong? Like, that's the thing that I do. Now, mind you, he would always be like hollering at me while he's doing it. Move, it's drifting, because I lose focus and, I'm the lights over here and he like, put it there, I can't see, put it there, But either way, that was my sacred responsibility. We gonna fix this car together. Even though I'm just holding it. But when you're a child, you don't know you're not really fixing nothing, So that brings me to something that happened interesting today, and I know the person is going to probably see this because they saw the last one. I was coming out of a store today, and there was a brother who was, I'm walking this way, they're walking the other way, and he said, Chief Yuya, right? Now, I had like one of my earbuds, and not both, just one. I was actually listening to something, so I always greet people anyway, so I said, peace. And I thought he gave me back another excited peace. But when I looked at his lips, like I was lip reading, it didn't look like, it looked like ch. I said, did he say chief or did he say peace? And I'm like, I don't know. But I say, hey, peace, brother, how you doing? And kept it moving. I said, well, maybe it's somebody. And as I'm walking, I'm like, where do I know him from? I must know him because he seemed really excited to say peace. But did he say chief? So as I'm still walking, I look behind me, he's running, he comes and he runs up behind me. And he's like, I just wanted to thank you for all you do, like your teaching and stuff. I said, you said chief, like what? I'm just cutting him. I was like, did you say chief or peace? He said, I said chief. I said, oh, I'm sorry, brother. I said, I was moving and I didn't hear you, but he had told me he had been listening. And brother, I may get this wrong. You either said 2016 or 2006. Since I knew it was a 16. Since you have been listening, and he thanked me for the work, and he thanked me for the teachings, and shared what I had been doing was very meaningful, to him. And the thing about it is that, it was very interesting to me because that I've been spotted about 4 times in the last 14 days, last 2 strongs. And 2 of those times I was not spotted by my face. A lot of times I'm spotted by my voice. That has happened multiple times. And the last time before this time, I was spotted by my voice. I was actually in a music store. And I was speaking into a mic and I felt a tap on my shoulder. And, I kind of turned. Well, first I got a black eye when I was a child by responding to a tap on my shoulder. My first black eye, actually. So I'm very leery of when people tap on my shoulder, but I kind of, turned around and he's like, Chief Yuya? And I said, yeah. But he had heard my voice. Now that happens pretty often with the voice. So I was kind of messing with the brother. I said, you recognize my face or my voice? Because I wasn't talking. He's like, no, your face. He's like, I've been watching, So, and peace to you, brother. The thing about it is that I bring that up not to speak about, any level of public validation or anything like that. That may be needed for me to continue doing what I'm doing or anything like that. It's because sometimes when you're building, you don't always know who's carrying what you're teaching. You don't always know how long, there could be something you shared with someone 8 years ago, or 10 years ago, and you don't know how it's being carried forward or if it's being carried forward. And that was sort of a confirmation on some things I had been meditating on, even when he ran into me. You don't always know who was corrected by a word that you gave, right? You don't always know who received teaching or who was redirected by something that you said, or who was protected by something that you may have given, and it could be something that you almost forgot that you even said. I always, not in a good way, but I always prided myself on the fact that I could remember every lecture pretty much I've ever done, right? So not necessarily the dates and stuff like that, but when someone would bring something to me, like, you taught about this at one point, I can follow. Yeah, I taught about it and I can follow through with it. I'm getting to a point now where they are getting a little fuzzy. You know what I mean? But you got to keep in mind, I've been speaking publicly since 1990, right? So that's when I first hit the stage, and I think I shared my first message was "Who's down with OPP?" Right? That was my very first lecture that I shared in front of people. So that give you an idea how long ago it was. And when I did that lecture, that was like a newish song, Who's down with OPP? That was my first lecture. So yeah, like I can remember that one. I remember what I talked about in that one, but it gets fuzzy over the years. Just on YouTube alone, it's like 2,000 lectures. I had to categorize them at one point. That's just YouTube. That's not the podcast. That's not lectures I've done in bookstores and on stages and in colleges. And, so it starts to get a little fuzzy after a while. So, you think about the responsibility of teaching, because you might share something 10, 15 years into the future, you don't even really remember what you shared. You don't, it's like, yeah, I know around the subject. That sounds like something I would say. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it may have such a grand impact that it saves someone's life or protects someone's life. You see, peace. I'm a Z2616. It's good to be seen lately. Thank you. Teaching is not just about content, right? When you're really teaching is about a seed. You're planting a seed, and what happens as a result, if the seed is clean and if the seed is properly formed, if the seed isn't poisoned by confusion or poisoned by ego or poisoned by appetite or poisoned by performance, right? Then the seed will travel way further than your analytics will ever show you that it did, right? I got a little tiny channel here. There's only right now, more people gonna come in because they was coming late. There's only 20 people here, right? So this isn't one of those channels where, oh, we got 1,500 people in the live tonight. We got 2,000 people. I think the most I've ever had in a live, I remember, was about 87, something like that, 87, 88, right? So obviously, little tiny channel, analytics. I'm invisible, right? But you never know when a seed is pure, how it will go so far. So you may teach something 15 years ago or 20 years ago, and it just, you see, it's like a comet hurling through space. Analytics they can tell you who clicked on something, right? When you go back into the back end and look at your analytics, but the analytics can't always tell you who was changed by what they heard, you see, or who was changed by what they clicked on. Analytics can't tell you that, the change that actually happened, man. Oh man, he said this, it came just at the right time. I've been meditating on this. I've been thinking about ancestors, or I've been thinking about building family and what that looks like. And he spoke about it, and it just, confirmation, and someone may take off in a direction that you never expected. It can't tell you who carried your word for years, right? So I want to sort of speak on a little bit the words that are worth carrying. There's some words that are worth carrying. There's some words that you can let them go. And I'm not just talking about ancestor talk or culture talk or Black consciousness talk, or Black consciousness language or religious debating, things like that. Things that you've never really heard me really get into too much anyway, because it's those kind of words, they don't go that far. They make a lot of noise in the moment, but they don't travel very far. I want to speak about the kind of teaching that helps a person to raise a house. That's what I'm going to deal with tonight. That helps a person to raise a house, to raise a child, to govern themselves, to choose properly, to choose with order, and to leave something good behind. Something good behind, right? That type of word has to come in a very clean way. Because again, you have a lot of people who've existed inside of this conscious space for a very long time and have not built houses, have not shown and proved, have not taught how to do that. How do you maintain it? How do you build a family? How do you build a family institution? That was one of the last videos I did recently, building a family institution, what that looks like. What do the roles look like? Because if we're going to speak about ancestors, the important things is that we have to ask much harder questions around that. Are we becoming ancestors that are worth remembering? I want you to take a moment and just ask yourself that, like in a real way. Are you becoming an ancestor that is worth remembering? We have become very comfortable speaking about Egun or speaking about ancestors, which is great. I love that. You know, but people speak about ancestors when they need a sense of identity, or they want to feel a level of cultural depth, you know, or even when they want to feel rooted. And there's nothing wrong with that at all, because there's nothing wrong with remembrance, or calling upon the names to bring certain realities back into your memory. Those who gave their blood, those who persevered, you know, those who gave spirit, those who gave us our songs, those who gave us our land, those who gave us our memory, those who gave us our survival instinct, right? Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. But ancestor language becomes very weak when it's detached from responsibility. You see, then it's like, just shut up. Like, what are you talking about? You know, when it's not connected to responsibility. Peace, JR Inspires. Peace to you too as well. You know, ancestors weren't just people, right? They weren't just people. Our Egun, they were people who had to hold houses together, right? That's a critical piece. They had to hold houses together. They had to raise children. They had to grow food. You know, they had to protect family lines. These are all the different things that they had to do, you know, when you look at it. And they had to teach young people what was sacred and what was dangerous, right? That's sort of a lost art now, unfortunately, especially when you live in a time now where a lot of the young people, they're just not, they ain't trying to hear it. They're not listening. I'm always astounded and really honored when I speak to younger people, because for some reason they listen to me. Like, and I think it's the age that I'm at. You know, I'm at sort of an in-between age where I have a lot of people who are in their 70s and 80s. I was just talking to one on the phone right before we started, who I speak to, and they sometimes ask me for advice or for help with different things. But then I have people who are 17 and 18 and 20, you know, and they want to be around me and talk to me, and, you know, all that OG and unk stuff, you know, which I'm still getting used to, you know, when I hear, like, because when I hear it, I don't even turn around. Like, I know you ain't talking to me, you know, but it is what it is. You know, this is where we're at now, you know. But I'm appreciative of the heirs, you know, or whatever spirit the creator put in me that would make a younger person say, yeah, you know, not only I'm gonna listen to what he's saying, I'm gonna apply what he's giving me, you know. So I'm appreciative. But our ancestors didn't have the luxury of turning every feeling that they had into an identity, you know, like we tend to do. You know, they didn't have the luxury of making every discomfort that they had into a doctrine, like you see in a lot of the churches and whatnot. You know, they couldn't collapse a house and destroy it every time an adult inside the house didn't feel seen, you know, or didn't feel emotionally validated, or felt emotionally inconvenienced. You know, they didn't have the luxury to be like, all right, well, you know, you go your way and I go my way, because you're not happy, because you're not getting what you want, because you're inconvenienced. So you go your way, I'll go my way. They weren't so silly. They had to build. They had to build, right? Um, that's what made them ancestors. That's what made them ancestors. It wasn't just that this was a person who died before you, right? That's too easy. That's too easy. It's not just that this is a person who died before you. It's not just that they occupy some distant, far off spiritual space that we're trying to connect to and understand and stuff like that, but it's that they stood in a time and they gave enough of themselves that somebody after them could have a name, that somebody after them could have a path, someone after them could have a story, you see, could have a warning, could have a skill, a rhythm, a prayer, a piece of ground to stand on. That's what made them ancestors. Not just that they died a lot of, excuse me, I almost said a word. Whew, almost said a word. People, it started with the letter N. People die every day. People die every day. You know, I haven't been going live and stuff. It's been about a year or so, so I'm a little rusty. So I gotta make sure that other talk don't come over. Keep it professional. People die every day, right? That doesn't make them an ancestor, right? Did that person leave a path? The warnings, I think about the warnings from my Egun. Oh my goodness. The game that I was put on inside of my blood. Not even something Egun I didn't even meet, stories I heard later. But the game that I was put on inside of my blood. These are warnings, man. Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Safta Hava. Shabbat shalom, Brother El Karar. So when we're talking about ancestors, we're not just talking about who do I come from or we're asking, who am I continuing? That's the thing. It's not just about who did I come from. Who am I continuing? What am I interrupting? You see, that's what we should be asking when we're talking about our Egun. What am I interrupting and what am I continuing? Because some of the things that were inherited shouldn't be continued. Shouldn't be continued. Some pain doesn't deserve another generation. Nah, you don't bring that forward. Like, nah, you got us before that. Enough. You got enough out of our blood. Enough. You don't bring it forward. You see, some disorders don't deserve a child. You got like grandfather, grandmother, great-great-grandmother, great-great-grandfather disorders, and you're giving birth to their children, to the disorders of those children, paranoid schizophrenia, and you give birth, and now you got a little baby paranoid schizophrenia, and it's like their spirits, the spirits of those disorders are reproducing right along with your bloodline. That's really the enmity between the serpent and the woman's seed. That's another conversation. But I would urge you all to make sure you're not romanticizing familial patterns just because they're old. You know, sometimes we look at things that our family did and we've always been like this, or this has always been going on. And then we romanticize it. And I think a lot of that also comes from religion. Things are romanticized that should be done away with. I remember having a conversation not too long ago with a sister about Thanksgiving and what people were eating. And she was very offended because people were speaking against the type of food that their families were eating. You know, like, yeah, you guys are about to go do Thanksgiving and basically eat these murder plates, you know. And she was like, how dare you speak about what the ancestors had to eat and these things that they gave us, these recipes. I'm like, that's why a lot of them were ancestors sooner than they should have been ancestors. Like, we don't have to carry that garbage forward. We don't have to be eating scavengers and all this stuff. We don't have to carry that forward. Like, we have to take a hard look at that. You know, like, how did they come to that place, right? So sometimes we romanticize because you wrap that stuff inside of a wicked holiday, and it feels like it's the right thing to do. You know, everything that's old is not ancestral wisdom. I said that before. Some things are just old wounds. That's it. And sometimes we have old wounds that learn how to speak cultural language. So we think it's us. It's part of our culture. You see? So when we're talking about the house And when we're talking about family, one of the things that I've always expressed is that you have the individual, the man in particular. The man creates family with the woman by not necessarily just laying with her, but producing offspring. That's family, that triad, right? And then that family then can go on to produce a clan. That clan can go on to produce a community. Communities can then produce kingdoms. Kingdoms can then produce empires. Empires can produce nations, right? So there's a flow. And I know, like, again, when I give some of that information, I have had people like get a bit upset behind that, but I don't give it. Like, show me a nation. Show me another way that a nation is produced, and then you know we can have a conversation. But if we know that we had these things before, and we know we had a formula for them before, and then when oppressors came in and conquerors, and they conquered us, and they removed these formulas for us, we got to ask, why did they remove those formulas? If we knew this is the way that we establish great nations, So when we talk about it's a lot of times we just speak about community as if it begins when enough people gather in a room together. We got a community. That's not the genesis of the beginning of a community, just because you got a bunch of people in the room. Community always begins in the condition of the house. That's what is going to be the core nucleic image of what that community is. It begins with what the child, I'm tell you how community first starts. It really starts with the children. It begins with what the child hears when there's no audience. That's what starts the community. Sometimes you see, like, on the different social media platforms, people have their whole families up there. I am vehemently against having, doing that. You notice you've never seen me in any pictures with my wives or with my children or anything like that. And not just because I don't want them to be seen. It's a protective measure. Same way that I'm spotted when I go out. And this has been for years. I remember one time I was out, I was with my daughter, and I was spotted, right? Chief Yuya, oh, da, da, da. And my daughter was getting a little older by then, so she had a different perspective. And she said, Baba, do you have paparazzi? I said, no, baby. I don't know doggone paparazzi. She's like, but that's not the first time we were somewhere somebody recognized you. Do you have paparazzi? Are you sure that they're not, like, taking pictures of you? So, and of course, no. I was like, baby girl, like, ain't nobody paying attention to Baba. Like, it's just a few people, But the point is that, yeah, I keep that protection, and it's not just visually, right? Because I can get spotted, my children can get spotted, but it's also energetically, because these platforms take a lot out of you, and they pull on purpose. They pull on purpose. You got a lot of succubi, and they'll connect to you through your platforms, through your images, through your videos. So I'm not an advocate. Now, what you do with your children, knock yourself out. I'm not an advocate of having my children being seen online. I think it's a very inappropriate and pointless thing. Like, what are you doing? What are you performing for? Why do they have to be on this? So someone can look at you a certain way. Someone can give you a certain honor and a certain dignity. If you want to show the honor and the dignity of having a family, just show your mate there. Show that. That's dignified. That's how your pictures should be for the most part anyway. But like I said, the community begins with the children. It begins with the children. It begins with what the children see when the adults agree or the adults disagree. A lot of times people don't realize, when a child knows who teaches them, who protects them, who corrects them, who listens to them, and who stays stable enough to remain present even when life is inconvenient, that's when you start to get the formation of community. You thinking you're doing it as the adult, you ain't really doing much. It's the children who build that community going forward. The house is where where a child first learns whether the world is safe or if the world is unstable. Think about it. Think about how you came up and the things that you saw in your home, whether it was a peaceful home or whether it was a chaotic home, and ask yourself honestly, think about it. Like, how did that shape your perception of outside and other people going forward, and your willingness to trust, or your willingness to be vulnerable, or if you went out into the world in a very protective sort of defensive stance because of what you saw at home. You see, instability at home is going to create this defensiveness and this hyper vigilance. You may live in the middle of a meadow. It's the most peaceful. It could be named Peaceful Valley, USA, right? But if your home is unstable, you're going to go outside in Peaceful Valley with knives drawn. Like, what? You're going to always be on gladiator time because of the instability. So the community, the perception, because the home will project itself into the outward, which creates the community. Before a child knows any sort of law, children know something first. That's really important. It kind of makes me sick when I see adults use this. Children know tone. Tone. Children feed and function from tone, right? You think about when you're feeding a child something that the child doesn't want to eat. What do? You give a certain tone. If you give the wrong tone, they will be crying, eat your eat your broccoli. No, I don't want it like that. But it could be something like Brussels sprouts, whatever, your child doesn't like, and you do the little airplane like, oh, this is so good. Don't you want some of this and that? Right? Because children understand tone before they understand law. And the reason why I say it's a bit sickening when I see it in adults, because adults like to do that. It's not what you said, it's how you said it. No, it's what I said. It's what I said. It's not how you stop acting like a child. Is what I said. Can you extract substance and truth, or does everything have to be given to you on this perfect little platter? That's just a trick and a tool for deflection and to remove themselves from accountability. I would have did what you said if you would have said it to me. Get the F out of here, man. Get real. So before a child knows things like law and doctrine, a child understands tone. Another important thing that a child takes on and understands is atmosphere. A child understands atmosphere before they understand your teaching. It's one of the reasons why I often say don't teach your children any sort of spirituality until they come to the age of reason. Because they're going to just mythologicalize everything that they come into contact with, right? So give them the science of tone. Give them the science of atmosphere. Before you give your child theology, a child is going to make a judgment before they make a judgment on any religion. A child is going to make a judgment on, do the adults that are around me, do they seem like they're governed, or do they seem chaotic? That's going to go so much further than other things. Then you teach them law and doctrine and theology. That's going to get you nowhere. It's one of the reasons why preachers' kids, the PKs as they call them, are so wild. It's one of the reasons. Because a lot of times when I've been in a lot of preachers' houses, it's chaotic. It's chaotic. They show one face on the pulpit, and then they get home and they're cursing and drinking and getting in all kind of chaos and craziness. And the children are formed by that. They're formed by that first, by the atmosphere, by the tone, by if my parents are governed or if my parents are chaotic. the house is not just where people sleep. The house is where identities get formed. That's what the house is. Think about how you are. If you're shy, if you're bold, if you're introverted, if you're extroverted, just think about the qualities that you have and imagine where those qualities were formed. Even if you may have certain things that you have about you. I trained in fighting for the bulk of my life, right? But I do believe that if I wasn't such a shy child, maybe fighting wouldn't have had the same allure that it had for me, or still does to this day, because I still love training, I still love learning, and I work with boxers and I teach, I coach. But I was a very timid, shy child. I didn't speak much, right? But I had siblings who were the opposite. I was like the quietest one. Well, not even like, I was the quietest one. They were the opposite. They were life of the party and funny and all of that. And, had tempers and fighting and stuff all the time. And me, I'm playing the guitar and writing poetry, right? So fighting became something for me. It was a form of self-expression for me to be able to say, wait a minute, I'm tough too. I just don't have the temper part, So if you put me in an environment where it's not about me being angry or something like that, then watch the damage that I can do, right? So, but that was a response to what I experienced at home. So some of the things that you may calculate that you say, well, I'm like this, but I learned this when I was out there, it may be a reaction to what was formed inside of you. I didn't get all that chat stuff. I'm sorry. But I see some succubi energy and stuff. But a home is where a child starts to learn how a man moves. A home is where a child learns how a woman moves. You see, it's where a child learns whether love has order attached to it, or love is just a name that people give to control, or love is just a name that people give to attachment, or love is a name that people give to resentment and fear and appetite. You see, because then the child will start to resent concepts of love. If I'm just doing this because I love you, or you controlling somebody to a degree that's unhealthy, right? Child learns all of that first at home, right? When the house is confused, the child is not sitting back and observing confusion. I wish a lot more parents would understand that. When a home is confused, a child is breathing in confusion. It's breathing it. And then once the child is breathing in confusion, it adjusts itself to the confusion. The child starts to call instability normal. So now when they get older and they're in a stable situation, what do? But you know the answer. They sabotage it. Because this isn't normal. This isn't normal. Instability is normal. See, when a child like that grows up and enters in jobs and enters in relationships and enters in communities and ministries and friendships and parenting with an internal map that was formed by disorder, they can't build anything. And then as an adult, to sit back and wonder, man, why can't we build anything? Why can't we get anything going? We wonder sometimes why we can't commit to anything. I start things, I never finish them, or you might be talking about someone else who starts stuff and never finishes, never commits themselves to anything, doesn't have any sense of endurance. I know a lot of people who can't be corrected. You just can't say anything to them. It just always goes left. And you could say it as gentle as you possibly can imagine saying it, but they just refuse any form of connection. Correction. I'm not having it. I'm going to misdirect it. I'm going to reframe it. I'm going to avoid it. I'm going to reword it. I'm going to make sure no matter what, I'm going to be the victim of you having to say something corrective to me or put up a boundary. They can't be led. We wonder why we have certain people in this world that can never stay anything inside of anything long enough to produce any fruit from it. They live a life that is very fruitless. You got people who will have children and they think they've reached the pinnacle. And that was the easiest part. Roaches make children. That wasn't hard. But do they really represent the fruit of union? Do they really represent the understanding, the highest expression of your union? No, because you can't never stay anywhere long enough to produce any fruit. Right? So we see that as a commonality from people from children who grow into adults who come from that kind of space, because they never had the beauty and the blessing of seeing a house that was governed well. A house that was governed well by man and woman, their father and their mother, their father and their mother. Not surrogates. I know it's not stuff. I know people just not gonna get a lot of views on this one. I understand this is not what people want to hear, because we've been taught by demonic energies to accept less and opposite of the divine plan, and to normalize demonic structure, which is going to be the opposite of what the divine plan is. We've been taught to do that, and to ridicule and to vilify anyone who stands on the principles of standing on divine design. And when we start speaking other language, I want you to always ask yourself, where are you getting that language from? Because when I look at the artwork and the pottery of my ancestors, I see man, woman, and child. And in some artwork, pottery, and reliefs, I see man, woman, woman, children. So when you try to normalize something else from me, maybe that came from your people, wrestling each other naked with olive oil all over them. That didn't come from my people, right? So when we have children who grow up in like that, they never saw adults sharing space properly. They never saw adults doing anything beyond surviving. They just saw adults reacting. You see, they came up in a time, and I'm gonna try to get to these chats. They saw adults using children as emotional witnesses. You ever seen stuff like that? Where parents say, "You see what your mother did? You see what she did, right? You gonna do that in front of the children?" Well, you started the argument in front of the children so that they would see, because you want to ally, or you break down in front of your children so they can see you cry and go and say, "It's okay, mommy, don't cry." You're using your children as emotional witnesses. You see, a lot of people who have that sort of dysfunction where they can't really build and get anything going, they saw adults weaponizing pain. Weaponizing pain. Narcissists do that a lot. Like I said, a lot of narcissists, they were trauma informed and trauma damaged narcissists. They went through some things rough when they were young, or maybe even when they were older, and they became narcissistic as a result. They learned to weaponize their pain and project it on to other people. You see, there's ways that narcissists are formed, and it's not just they came out of a vat of acid and jumped into the world and now start damaging and hurting other people. A lot of times they were created that way through their own childhood trauma. Sometimes for some of those young people, they saw adults who confused affection with love. And they were able to peep it when they were young, like, that ain't love. You see, but in all of that, they never saw a house. They never saw a house. Now, you might be one of those people, right? And you might be listening and you might be saying, Well, it was me, my mother, my father, my 5 brothers and sisters, 6 brothers, 7, whatever. We lived in a beautiful home, went to private school. You could run the whole thing down, you know. Yeah, we all got cars at graduation, went on trips, you see. But all of the dysfunction that I just described typifies what you grew up inside of. It means you didn't grow up inside of a house. There was no house. There was just people who gathered together and maybe thought the idea of man, woman, and child was outdated. We are living in a time where people want to act like father, mother, and children is some sort of outdated arrangement. It's like demonized now. Oh, the nuclear family, the nuclear. Yeah, well, I'm not a huge fan as a polygynist myself. I mean, I'm not a big advocate of the nuclear family as well, but I certainly am an advocate of being with my gender complement. Absolutely. And having youth, germinating my seed, into my gender complement, who can produce, through her process, produce a child that I created. I create the child, she produces the child. I am an advocate of that. And people speak about that sort of thing like it's just old language, like it's, oh, that's the patriarchy speaking, like it's just some sort of traditional preference. Oh, you prefer to do it that way. Well, yeah, I prefer to build kingdoms. I prefer to build strong families. I prefer to build houses. I do prefer that, as if a child doesn't need the ordered presence of a man and a woman. You see, that's confusion. That's confusion that people are living in and preaching. That's all that is. That's all that is. Oh, you don't need your mother around. You don't need well, really, it's you don't need your father, because we still living out the Willie Lynch letter. Yeah, bring that guy over here, get pregnant by him, and then send him back out into the wilderness. We'll raise the baby. You bring that baby here to us. We're going to raise the baby. You send him back out into the wilderness. Kind of slave ass thinking is that? That's some slave thinking. For a productive, ordered child to be produced, that child needs the ordered presence of a mother and a father. Man, woman, and child is not a slogan. Sun, moon, and stars is not a slogan. It's not some sort of spiritual, cultural, political statement or some sort of sentimental image or something that you see in an old photograph and talk about how we used to be when times was simpler. And it's a living architecture that governs the entire universe. Knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. You see, light, dark, electromagnetic. It governs the entire universe. It governs the existence that we currently exist inside of. It's the arrangement through which life enters. It's the arrangement through which life is named. The arrangement through which life is protected. Through which life is sent forward. Through which life is even trained. That's the arrangement. And people have got demonic, evil, wicked, spiritual forces making them think that that's an outdated arrangement. Every situation it's not going to unfold perfectly. We know that. That's just how it is. Like I said in the last one, people are going to experience separation. They're going to experience death. They're going to experience betrayal, conflict, abandonment, different kind of hardships. That's our experience. But we're not children. We're not children. We know life is not always neat. There's too much romanticizing. There's a lot of that Disney programming. People use the mythology to cultivate a new mind in people. And they get so twisted in their thinking that they're really focused on Disney, even when they think they're out of it. It's still the prince and the princess stories, and you come rescue me, and I'm sleeping here, and you come wake me up with a kiss, and all of that. You know, the existence of broken situations doesn't erase the legitimacy of the original structure that was given to us. That's just the reality of it. It's not gone just because something else exists. The fact that people have survived this long without something, it doesn't prove that they've never needed it. You know, it doesn't prove that. You imagine how long you can go without bathing. Be honest. And I know people who live I know personally someone who lives in that community, they don't bathe. They share with me they only bathe periodically when they're in a relationship with someone. But outside of that, they do not bathe. This is not a homeless person. This is not an unemployed person. This is the community of people that they live in. But imagine how long you could go without bathing. You could probably go a pretty long time without bathing, because some people generate less funk than others, right? But should you? Should you do that? You know, a child can survive without a father. But that doesn't mean that fatherhood is unnecessary. A child can survive without a mother. But that doesn't mean that mothers are disposable. Doesn't mean that. You know, a person can survive inside of chaos, but that doesn't mean that they should make chaos their culture. Doesn't mean that. You see, survival is not the same as order. It's not the same. Survival is not the same as order. And that's where we have to become a bit more honest. You know, a child should not have to inherit the emotional weather of adults who never learned how to govern themselves. And for those of you coming in, you know, a little later, we're talking about the construction of a house. You know, not a physical house, not a physical structure, but an arrangement of responsibility and divine royal dignity that mirrors what exists within the heavens for the purposes of nation building, right? A child should never have to become the battlefield for the unresolved wars of unsettled adults, or have to carry the confusion of grown people who made decisions out of fear, who made decisions out of appetite, you know, or who made decisions out of pride and then tried to rename their disorder as freedom. But we're raised in a society that flips everything that the divine architect has created and puts it upside down. And that's how you're controlled. You know, children are not an inconvenience. They're not a bargaining chip. They're not your emotional possession. They're not proof that somebody won. You know, they're not the object that should be used to punish another adult. The child is the assignment. That's your assignment. So any adult who can't understand that the child is the assignment is too childish to lead the future. Now, men, a man has to have a house. And I don't mean that every man listening tonight already has the money and already has the land and already has the spiritual union with a sister or sisters, you know, or only has resources or the full structure for everything that they desire. You know, I'm not speaking as though, and that's a good point, Nakia Ubuntu, you know, says it seems like children are only ours, you know, until income taxes. Yeah. You know, but I'm not speaking as though the man begins from the same place. You know, not every man is going to be able to do that, but a man should have the desire and the discipline to build a house. A man should have the desire and the discipline to build a house. Straight up. He should have a name that means something. Even before he builds a house, does your name mean something? You know, do you have a standard that's attached to you that people can recognize? Right? Do people know what you're about when they see you? You know, do you have a direction that's larger than your mood? You see, I ain't feel like it. Well, what happened? I thought you was going to school to become a welder or pipe fitter. I thought you were going to school to become a plumber. I thought you were starting a business. Yeah, you know, I am. Yeah. Don't come around me. Don't come around me, please. Don't come. Get away from me. Your direction has to be larger than your mood. And that means you have to set up a life where it's uncomfortable not to do. You have to establish a life where your comfortability becomes your vacation. This is something that I tell my youth all the time. Comfortable is a vacation. Uncomfortable is your life. And you have to establish that sort of motif. So it's not about how you feel. This is just what some days you get up. I didn't feel like doing a live today, but live has to be done. There's bags under my eyes. You can see them. So it's not about what I do when I feel like doing. I do what I'm supposed to do. Right. And that has to be the norm. And then some days I actually do. I'm going to feel like doing something some days. And oh, cool. That's a bonus. Now I'm on vacation because now I'm doing this thing comfortably. But you can't stay on vacation forever. You got to go back to your real life. As a man, that's uncomfortability. A lot of cats, you weren't raised by people who, you know, had enough testosterone and male gonads to teach you that lesson. So you move by mood. You know, you should have a vision that doesn't get swallowed up by your appetite. You can't be gambling away the rent money, you know, or the seed money for the business that you were getting ready to build, and you gambled or you tricked it off. You know, your appetite should not swallow up your vision. You know, you got to have a discipline that tells you, and it tells all the people around you that, hey, there's order here. It should be apparent. There's order here. A man cannot demand a house if he doesn't have a house first in his spirit. That's where the house begins. The house begins in your spirit. You see? So you might be like, well, I don't have the money right now. I don't have land right now. I don't even have a woman right now. I don't have a woman. I don't have children. Okay, that's cool. That's cool. You know, but is it in your spirit? Because it has to project out of your spirit first anyway. You see? A man can't demand a house or even speak about family if he's not governing himself. That's too much of a, you know, it's too common, man. I know so many emotional males, man. And just because you work out and you got tattoos doesn't mean you a man if you still approach the world with so much emotion. You see, and you're using, and that emotion sabotages and undermines everything. You know, if you're still offended by discipline, which a lot of you guys are, you're offended by discipline, you can't have children. You can't have children. As a man, how are you going to have children when you're offended when discipline comes? What are you going to unleash onto the planet's surface? You see, if you're the type of guy where every correction feels like an attack to you, if you're still in that place, Correction always feels like you're attacking me, you're not seeing me, you're mistreating me. You know, I've seen it on work sites a lot. Every time correction comes, yes, you know, shut up, man. How are you going to lead a family if you can't be corrected? If you being corrected feels like an attack, you know, before a man builds a home around him, that man has to build a home inside of him first. That's the lonely part of the job. Lonely nights like this. It's the lonely part of the job. You got to build that home inside of you first. All of those components that you're going to imbue and teach and train into, you know, this wonderful blessing of a woman that's going to be formed and shaped for you specifically, and for those wonderful children that are going to come as a product of the love that you have between them. Everything that you're going to impute into them has to first be growing and live and cultivated inside of you. There has to be order to your way of thinking. Now, you know what it means also when there's order to your way of thinking? Because I know for me, I can't stand to listen to no disordered man. Like I got friends I haven't spoken to in years behind that. I can't listen to too much of that. You're just saying stuff that just doesn't make any sense, especially if there's disagreement behind it. You telling me about some argument you had with your lady or something, and I'm listening, and I'm always the one be like, "Yo, she was right." I'm not into that. Like, if she don't come to me with that, because I'm gonna tell you when you're wrong. Like, she's right, bro. You need to go apologize to her, man. That sister's right. You know, if your thinking is disorder, who wants to hear that crap, man? You know, and there's something that goes along with that. Disordered thinking leads to disordered sexuality. So for a man to build a house, he has to be ordered in his thinking, and he has to be ordered in his sexuality, right? There has to be order in his finances. If I ask you how much you make, you can't go look at a pay stub. You should know how much you make. You should know how much you're saving every month. You should know how much you're investing every month. You should know how much is in your emergency fund. You know, if you've reached your emergency fund, or how much is in it. You know, how much is in your land fund, right? Just like churches, you should have a building fund. How much is in your land fund? You know, this like your finances have to be, how often do you look at your finances? When you feel like you're low on money, do you avoid looking at your bank app? I don't even want to look. I'm just going to try to charge and see what happens. Are you one of those? Right? You can't have a house like that. You have to be ordered in your time. You have to be ordered in time. Time is opportunity. That's what time is. It's a gift. It's like air. It'll be here after you're gone. You didn't create it. You didn't generate it. You can't get it back. It's I breathe in, I gotta give it back. You see? I can't even hold on to the air of my body. You can't hold on to time. So your time has to be ordered, because a family is a blossoming lotus flower. It's always moving. Every day matters in a family, especially when you have young children, because every day they look different. They do something different. That's time you can't get back. Let them burn in hell, right? There has to be order in your speech. And I know with men, what I find, a lot of men, we're a little different in our speech than women are. A lot of times women can be a lot sharper in their speech. Men, sometimes they build up to their point when they're making a point. You know, not that they're working it out in their head while they're speaking, but sometimes it's, you know, that they'll provide a little bit more context. They'll ramp up to what they're saying. But then I've seen a lot of guys who just ramble on, and you don't understand, what the heck are you talking about? You're just rambling on nonsense. You filibustering. Go sit down. You know, like, get a mic back. You're not, what are you talking about? So you got to be ordered in your speech. You got to know what you're saying when you're saying it. You got to have proper recall, you know, when you're saying things. Basically, no, what I said was this. I didn't say that. I said this, right? even if you have to use tools in order to do that. Um, the most important thing in all of that, a man has to be ordered in his relationship with his creator. That's that's all of it. If you don't have that, nothing works. You can learn time management. You can join Toastmasters. You can learn how to speak and order your thoughts and be more succinct and know how to speak to this child needs to be spoken to this way. This woman needs to be spoken to that. You can learn different people's languages and things like that and how best to communicate with them. But if you don't have order in your relationship with the creator, structure, not, yeah, I believe in it. Order. What do you do when you first wake up? What do you do when you're falling asleep or when you're putting yourself to bed, right? Is your relationship ordered or is it casual? Because if so, then you're going to lead your family right to ruin. If a man is internally scattered, he will eventually scatter whatever gathers around him in his space. He becomes dangerous to even stand around if he's internally scattered. I have also seen that throughout the years with different guys that I've known. A lot of times, unfortunately, it usually happens with their wife coming to me for counsel. And I usually will say, well, can I speak to your husband? Like, can we do a session with everyone, if you don't mind? Because I know what that could lead to. Now she comes back to the house with a different level of information and insight. And she's looking at him like, you look even worse now. Because I had to go and seek for counsel from a man outside of this home for what was going on in here, which should never, ever, 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 ever happen. Ever. If you feel you need some counsel or some direction and you guys go together to an elder, or you let him know, like, hey, I think we might need some help. You let him do that. Don't ever do that. That is treacherous. That's betrayal. That's why you always like, can I speak to your husband? Can I speak to you? You think we could do a session with your boyfriend before? That's when you first schedule. But I've seen it so many times, and then I'll talk to him, and I'm like, man, this guy is internally scattered, and this woman and the children are lost. They're on a path of destruction because of his internal scattering. Women may come, children might come, community can even come, opportunities will come, but if you as a man don't have any internal governance, then everything that comes into your life will have to eventually survive your disorder. That's not right. That's not right. You're turning your children and your women into survival. It's like become survival island. Just because they're around you, because you're internally disordered. That's not right. And that's why a man must become more than attractive. Just women are very superficial. We know that, even though we're always told women are way more superficial. That's why when a woman is talking to other women and they're talking about what they're going through with their man or their new man, what's the first thing you want to do? Girl, let me see a picture of him. Girl, let me see a picture of him. Men never ask for pictures of their friend's girl. We would know that's what? What you want to look at my girl for? That's offensive. And even if we meet your girl and we're not gonna be like, why are you with her? Because we don't think like that. So a lot of times, a lot of you men, you're building up a lot of external attractiveness, but what's more valuable is your dependability. Dependability is better than being attractive. It doesn't matter what they say on Pop the Balloon. Those women are washed that go on that show anyway. So don't go by that. You might watch that for entertainment, but don't go by that. They're washed. Dependability will always beat out attractiveness. I learned that from my early years of being a working musician. My father used to always tell me that. He used to back in the days, he wanted me to buy a station wagon so bad. He used to always talk about, you need a station wagon, you need a station wagon. I'm not driving no station wagon, right? This is before, I'm a little longer in the tooth. So this is before the era of SUV. I mean, we had trucks back then, but Brothers wasn't driving no trucks back then. Not till like the Chevy Blazer came out and the Ford Explorer. That was like the first time brothers was like, all right. I mean, Mazda MPVs, but those are like minivans, you know, or were. They don't even make them anymore. But because his whole thing was like, you gotta be reliable. He would always say, look, man, if you're a reliable musician, you're always gonna work. You're always gonna beat out guys who are flashy, who can play better, or whatever, whatever. And that always stuck with me. Show up on time, practice, know the music, you know the changes, know everything we're doing. What key is everything in? Make sure your instrument is properly tuned up and working right. You know, you don't have cables and stuff. When you get on stage, you plugging thing and sparks is coming out and stuff. And you like, it's all right, I'm gonna work on it. You know, have your stuff in proper working order. Have a car. If you have to get back and forth to gigs, have a reliable car. That was always his thing, man. Get a station wagon. You can load all your gear in the back, man. It's easy. I'm not driving a station wagon. I'm sorry. Sorry, Pops. I'm not coming from playing on stage and then loading up in a station wagon. No, I don't play for rock bands. Rock bands can get away with stuff like that, you know. But that dependability is better than being attractive, right? Like there's some musicians who are super flashy, they got the look and everything like that, but they don't show up on time. You got to go find them when it's time for the gig and stuff. I work with guys like that, man. Can you go find, I think he's over such and such projects. There's some girl over there he messing with. See if you can find him. The gig starts in 20 minutes. You know, stuff like that. A man has to be dependable, and more than being charismatic, that's a programming that we've gotten. It's so sad. We've been tricked into thinking that charisma equates to knowledge. That's why that Southern preacher motif, like you see someone like Killer Mike, and you hear the way he talks and he's country and everything, and you think he's talking about something. He ain't talking about nothing. He ain't talking about nothing. You know, but we've been trained into following people who are charismatic, you know, but more than charisma, a man has to be governed. That's more important than the charisma. You guys got to become governed, you know, even more than becoming a speaker, like a good speaker. Shut up and build. That's more important than speaking. Build. You don't have to be eloquent in your speech. You don't, you know, and again, I know we get a lot of that from like our game instructions. Like, you know, you go to a woman, you gotta be able to say this, you gotta be able to talk like this, you gotta be able to talk like that. Yeah, depending on what kind of sister you know you're trying to vibe with. But if you build in a house and a family, you can, like they say, the strong silent type. Be the strong silent builder. That's more important than being the eloquent or charismatic speaker. You know, before you're someone who learns how to gather attention, you know, however you do it. It could be your jewelry, it could be your body, it could be your clothing, it could be your car. What's more valuable in building a home than gathering attention is sustaining responsibility. Can you sustain responsibility over the long haul? That's better than the temporary attention you're gonna get. I know it's not as sexy, right? It's not as sexy when you think about what a woman may want, or you go onto social media and the attention that's offered there, or through flash, or you can catch someone's eye looking at you, whatever, because you got certain flash, whatever. That's cool if you're in certain environments, but if you're building a house, you have to learn how to sustain responsibility. Can you be consistent with certain things? Because if you can't govern yourself, you can't govern a house, you know. And I know that the word govern, it probably bothers people, but everything is governed by something. Everything. You know, if you don't govern your house with wisdom, your house is going to be governed with appetite. It's not like you say, okay, appetite, your turn. It's just going to happen. That's just how it works. You know, anything that's not governed by order is governed by emotion. So if you don't govern your house by order, emotion is going to govern it for you, right? Um, if your house isn't governed by a righteous authority, I'm going to tell you what governs a house that's not governed by a righteous authority. Temper tantrums. Do the math. If you don't govern your house by righteous authority, it's going to be temper tantrums that governs your house. So the question is not if the house is going to be governed. It's going to be governed. The question is what spirit is going to govern my house. That's the actual question. Now, what does it mean to be part of a house? A lot of people want the benefits of a house, but they don't necessarily, and you're right, I'm looking at the chat here. Akilo said that the strong silent builder, I like that. That should be a t-shirt. Go for it. A lot of people, oh, you said that's one of the most judgment shows, or I guess judgmental shows I've ever seen in my life. Yeah, pop the balloon. Well, it's a ritual. Pop the balloon it's a humiliation ritual. It's pop the balloon is a lower budget version of Kevin Hart's roast. It's a humiliation ritual. It's a very spiritual show, believe it or not. Not in a good way, but it's an occultic show. But like I was saying, a lot of people, they want the benefits of a house, but they don't want the responsibility. They want covering, they want protection, they want warmth, they want that feeling of belonging, access, association, but they don't want order. They don't want discipline. They don't want expectations. They don't want sacrifice. They don't want accountability. They don't want correction, or the restraint. You got to show restraint when you're being part of something that's larger than you. You gotta know how to restrain yourself. To be part of a house means you're not moving as an individual, a disconnected individual anymore. It means your conduct speaks beyond you. Your conduct, not your words, but your conduct. Your words will even speak beyond you inside of a house. But your conduct is going to start first. Your presentation speaks beyond you. How do you exit the house? How do you present yourself? How do you speak? What is your peace strobe or your wardrobe like? Your conduct, your choices, they could either dignify or dishonor the name that you're attached to by your choices. And that's why a house is such a serious thing, because a house is not just something that you claim when you want identity. I'm Mr. So-and-so, my daddy so-and-so, I'm Miss so-and-so, I'm so-and-so of the family so-and-so, I'm a part of house so-and-so. This ain't like the balls, man. The LGBTQ community has, House of LaBeija and House of Darion and House of Pendarvis and all them cats like that. That's a house is a standard that you have to submit to when you understand dignity. Every house has a different standard, right? So when you come into a house, you have to understand what the standards of that house are. You have to ask those things. It doesn't just mean that it's a house in that sort of cheap, modern, individualistic sense. Your life now carries relation. So your life carries memory. Your life carries consequence. Your life carries representation. You see? I'll give you an example. This actually came up recently with someone. I don't have casual sex, right? I haven't in so long, I don't even remember, but I don't have casual sex. And one of the reasons, and like I was sharing with a sister recently who had offered me some casual sex, let me just say what it is. That would be a disrespect to the women who have gone through a process to hold the standard of the House of Yuya. Right. So if this sister over here, she's gone through a certain experience and we've gone through a courtship and we've talked about certain things. And it's like, yeah, well, this is how we roll now. This is what we do. And then this sister over here, just, she's easy. That would be a grand disrespect to them over there. Right. Now, there's other reasons I don't have casual sex, but I can tell you that's honestly the number one reason. because I've established a standard with them, and it would be unfair to, and it will be disrespectful to allow someone else to encroach upon that standard. Because now I am in relation to, that's part of my sacrifice. I'm not just moving through the world in a cheap individualistic way anymore. I have other people, and my conduct represents them, right? So if you saw me out here just panty chasing or whatever, any woman that you see connected to me, you're gonna look at her like, she must not be that bright, or whatever you might say. I don't know, So I'm now representing that. When you step into the world, when you're part of the house, you're not stepping just as yourself. You're stepping as somebody's son. You're stepping out as someone's daughter. You're stepping out as someone's father, someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's husband. You're stepping out as someone's student, someone's elder, someone's representative, someone's teacher. That's what the modern world has tried to strip us from. They tried to strip that. Even the way we have names now. A lot of you don't even have your real names. I am Yuya of the House of Assaan-ANU. That's my actual name, not Yuya Assaan-ANU. No, Yuya of the House Assaan-ANU. Look it up. I'm not just hodgepodging, coming up with something ad hoc. Look up that name format, and you're going to see something. But modern culture wants everyone to believe that they're just individuals who are floating through the world, creating themselves every morning, and they're creating themselves every morning according to whatever feeling rises up in them, So that sounds like freedom to the undisciplined mind. But to a wise person, we know that ain't nothing but homelessness. That's homelessness. Peace, nephew. Shabbat shalom. You wake up every day and you recreate yourself based on how you feel, you're homeless. Because when you're functioning within a home, you're functioning within a standard. So what I just described is spiritual homelessness. That's social homelessness. That's cultural homelessness. Well, I do what I feel. I do my own thing. Okay. And that's because when you belong to nothing, you can be shaped by anything. You see, that's how people get corrupted. There's another word. I didn't use it. It starts with the letter M. And it sounds like it rhymes with the tested. Starts with the letter M. But that's how you get tainted and corrupted, because, this person is not attached to anything. I can just go in and I can make them whatever I want them to be. There's been studies done around that where people who have sex offenders, they've talked about, fatherless homes. Well, they say, how do you pick your victims? Well, when there's no strong father in the house, we know we can, because you're not attached to any authority. So I can turn you into anything. See, a house gives you a place. It gives you memory. It gives you correction, but it also gives you a way to measure yourself, right? It gives you something to protect. It gives you something to pass down. You see, it gives you something to pass down. Years ago, I did very well in the music industry from like literally a teenager up until 30s, 40s years old, 30s, 40s, in different capacities, whether I was a performance musician, playing on stage, studio musician, doing sessions, doing production, doing composition for film, bunch of stuff. I wore a lot of hats in the world of music. And we talk about how home measures you. One thing I knew My father was never all that impressed with my musicianship. He never said it, but I could tell. He was never all that. At one point he was, when I was much younger and I was kind of like a prodigy. And then when I started kind of diffusing my gift because I started playing a lot of different instruments. And he thought that that was amazing because he would always say like, man, like he would hear my recording. He'd be like, it sound like there's a whole band in there playing. You playing everything. You playing horns, you playing drums, you playing percussion, you playing bass, guitar. That's amazing. But there were several times when I got opportunities for one I could say, it was a long time ago. I got an opportunity to go on tour with Maxwell, like in I think 2004, 2005, somewhere around there. I was real cool with his bass player. I'm still cool with it. His bass player at the time. I'm sure he's doing something else by now. And he was going on tour with Jill Scott. So they needed a replacement. So he had recommended me, right? And I was like, at that time, I was like, I had some space and time. I was like, yeah, I could do the tour. And Maxwell's, it wasn't his manager. I think it was one of his road people, actually knew my father. So he asked him, like, yeah, he's like, your son. He was like, yeah, is he any good? I heard he's really good. And my father was like, yeah, he's all right. And I heard him say, he's like, yeah, he's all right. What? I'm just giving one example, right? But I remembered that. Now everyone else is like, yo, he's nice. Like he can play. He's nice. My father said, yeah, he's all right. That was like, man, I gotta go practice more. Like, oh man, I ain't doing nothing. I'm sought after at that point in my. I'm playing for a lot of different people. I'm doing a lot of different sessions. But he was right. I actually was falling off around that time because I was doing so much session work. Playing session work and playing performance is two different things. And I come from a performance background. But that when you're performing, even your muscles have to be different because you might be playing for an hour and a half straight, 2 hours straight, whatever. You're sweating, it's hot, your hands are getting sweaty. It's a lot of different factors. You're standing up, you got a heavy instrument. When you're in the studio, you might literally play for like 10 minutes. And somebody might just take what you just did and loop it and you out, or it's air conditioned, you sitting down, you comfortable. Play that back again. Let me do it, So I had been doing a lot of that. And I knew I fell off a little, but I'm like, it's not noticeable. And he was like, he's all right, because the house measured. See, that mattered more to me than anything else because the house measures you first. Excuse me. The house gives you something to protect, right? It gives you something to honor. Your house gives you something that for you to pass down, you see? And if that house is righteous, then the house becomes a training ground for royalty. That's how you create royal children, through a righteous home. Now I'm going to speak for a moment really quickly about the crest, right? I have a family crest. You see it on the House of Yuya page. That's our crest. A family crest isn't just artwork or like a logo. It may seem like that if you don't, like really look at it. It's not just a pretty symbol that we put on shirts and stuff like that. It's a public reminder. Your family crest, which I'm part of. I'm saying you should have a family crest. Your family crest is a public reminder that your house has a name. Your house has a standard. Your house has memory, and your house has a direction. I don't know if y'all hear all that. That's fireworks going on. It's not gunshot. So when you look at a crest, right, you should be looking at like something that's more than a design, if you will. You're looking at a covenant when you're looking at a crest. You're looking at someone's obligation. When you're looking at a crest, you're looking at a promise that this particular house is not random, right? It just wasn't two people who were attracted to each other and there was romance and emotions and got together. And no, you're looking at something that's not random, because a crest tells you that this house has a charge. There's a charge that's connected with this home and with this house. There's a spirit that's connected with this house. There's a Tao or a way, right? There's a way, there's a Tao. There's a Tao that's connected to this house. There's conduct. Very important. This house has history behind it, and this house has a future in front of it, right? So I would urge you men to think in terms of house crest, think in terms of name, think in terms of legacy. And it's not because you're pretending to be European nobility or anything like that. So don't please don't put that in your head, because you're not borrowing somebody's imagination of what royalty is. It's not that you need permission from anything from a worldly empire to understand your own dignity. You had dignity before they had anything. You had universities in Timbuktu when cats was still defecating in the same cave that they was giving birth to babies in, and then eating the freaking babies because they was hungry. Like, you had whole universities. So don't worry about that part. Dignity and honor is not something new to you, but because every serious people has found a way to mark their honor, these things are important. Every serious people has found a way to say, this is our sign. This is our color. This is our name. This is our pattern. Your house should have its own, well, we may say affirmation, you may say prayer. This is our prayer. This is our banner. And the crest and the banner are not the same thing, or your coat of arms. This is our banner. This is the mark that reminds us that who we are in the world when the world tries to make us common. You see, the world's going to always try to make you common. You see, so you have to structure your house. I'm talking to you dudes, man. I'm talking to the men. You got to structure your house in a way where the members of your house ask themselves, am I living in a way that honors this? Now, what that means is women going to leave you. They're going to leave. Because once they see there's a standard, there's boundaries, and there's something to live up to, they're going to ask that question. Man, I ask in front of you, ask it quietly, man, am I really living up to this? I might not be. I'm going to get out of here before he finds out what I really am. But here's one of the important things about all of this. When a child sees a coat of arms, or when a child sees a crest, I'm looking at Aki El Kara's piece. He said, I love coat of arms. When a child sees a crest, that child understands something. And this is the important thing to understand. This is something that I have to grow into. They'll look at that crest. I got to grow into this. If a woman carries the name of your house, she's going to understand, man, I'm not just carrying a decoration. I'm carrying dignity. I'm carrying dignity. If a man carries it, he understands, like, I'm not just carrying an image. The man's going to understand I'm creating an expectation. You see, that's the best way that's how I potty trained my children, through expectation, not through anything else. I'll be honest with you. I would always just say, that's not how we do that. To this day, they say that. To this day, they're grown. They say, we don't do that. Because that's the language that I used all the time. Oh, no, no, sweetheart, that's not, no, sweetheart, come on, we don't do that. We do this. You see? So as a man, one of your biggest roles is you have to create expectation, because symbols become witnesses against you. That's what a symbol does. You know, and if a man is not willing to live under the expectation then that he created, then he shouldn't even create a crest. Don't even have one. If you're not ready to live underneath the expectations of it, leave it alone. It's not for you, little dog, for little pup. It's for us big dogs. It ain't for you, little pups. If you're not willing to live under it, you know, a crest is going to either remind you. That's to say, there'll be a witness against you, because it's either going to remind people of your dignity, or a crest is going to expose your hypocrisy. So you gotta be careful. Don't make a crest. I've seen cats do this when they've heard me speak about it. Don't make one because you want to look royal. You know, build a life that's worthy of the crest. So the crest becomes inevitable. Like, yeah, of course I gotta have a crest, because look at what we're doing. Look at all the things we're doing. I gotta have that. You see? I'll give you a little exercise in that. One day, you know, pull out pen, pencil, whatever, paper, and write your will by hand. And I want you to time yourself. I want you to time how long it takes you to write your will. That's going to tell you something. It's going to tell you a lot as far as even your need for a will. I did that exercise with a brother some years back. I remember, and I felt bad for him, but he got it together. I said, we're going to sit down. We're going to write our wills. I already have one, but I said, I'm writing another one. I stopped after maybe 30 minutes. I wasn't done though. He stopped after about 4 or 5 minutes. You know, he had a gaming system, and he had some sneakers, like some collector sneakers or whatever. That was it. At the time, he was making about, I think he said around 87,000 a year. You know, he was 22. He was young, making good money. He's young. He had no assets. He had no assets. He had no investments. He had nothing. And he felt really bad. I remember me really talking him through it, because he felt like, you know, I don't have anything that like hand down. I don't have anything. And I was like, yeah, it would take me a long time. Like, and because I'm doing it off the top of my head, we're using pen and paper. So I'm thinking about, well, I ain't gonna tell y'all. I'm just thinking about stuff, right? It could be a bunch of junk I got. Let's just say that. I got a bunch of junk to hand out, right? Yeah, mind your business. But the point is, when you start to amass things that have value, even if they're sentimental, you'll start to see the need for other things, right? So once you start getting some assets, or if you have a business, like what happens when you transition? What happens to your business, right? So you want to start setting up things, say, okay, well, yeah, I don't want my business to disappear. Or you may have something where you have royalty checks. Like I have royalty checks I still receive, right? So when I transition, I want to make sure that someone has access to those checks in perpetuity, right? So in those sort of scenarios, you start to think about it. So it's the same way with a crest. What have you built that now facilitates you having it? Don't just create a crest because you want people to call you king. You know, yeah, I'm a king. Look at me. You know, it's my royal empire. You know, build a house where there's protection, and where there's discipline, and where there's correction, and where there's provision, and where there's teaching, and where there's spiritual direction. You know, when you have all of those different things, then the crest will start to make sense as to why it should be and what it should be. You know, don't make a crest because you want to appear established. Become established, right? Because your family crest is not the house. The crest points to the house. The crest is the visible sign of an invisible discipline. That's what your crest is. You know, I don't want you to ever think that royalty is a costume. You can't put it on. It's got to be in you. You know, that's the whole thing. You know, Quran says he chooses a Bible verse for your house. That's dope. Because you're talking about some like enduring wisdom, right? Um, I know a lot of times we use words like prince and king and queen and lineage and royalty and dynasty and bloodline and stuff like that. But it would be good for us to use those words with sobriety. Royalty isn't arrogance. It's not a costume. It's not walking around demanding that people validate your ego. It's not putting a crown on your broken behavior, or for you guys calling yourself a king while you're living like an appetite that has a throne. You don't have any. You take your sexual lack of discipline and just put it on a throne. You know, or you call yourself a queen, but you can't be corrected. Talking to the women who call themselves queen. I know some guys call themselves queen, but or you can't be settled. I know some women who can't be trusted with atmosphere. Or to honor the order if you're not watching them. Or you put them in the atmosphere, they're gonna funk up the atmosphere. They're gonna just stank it up depending on their mood. That's not how a queen moves. Royalty is just responsibility under a name. That's what royalty is. This is how we move. We are a such and such. A Lannister always pays their debts, right? Royalty is the ability to carry yourself with dignity when the world gives you the green light to be common, right? The world's like, nah, go ahead. You ain't got to do all that. You could just do it. Come over here with us. Act like this. Do hood rat stuff with your friends. And royalty says, nah, man, I'm royalty, because royalty is restraint. It's memory. It's clean conduct. It's holding down and knowing that your emotions don't have the right. Your emotions do not have the right to dishonor your house. You see, that's having a relationship with your emotions. You're like, nah, I ain't doing this. Your appetite can't dishonor your house, right? I know some people, back in the days, I kind of came up in the era of crack cocaine, and so knowing people who were, afflicted by that, and that was very common, but I knew certain guys and gals, who were on that substance heavy, and they anything that wasn't nailed down, they taking it, they selling it, they stealing it and they selling it. But you bring them to like their grandmother's house, and they would never dare ever take anything out of there, whatever. Certain people, no matter how bad they were in their addiction, they didn't allow their appetite and their addiction to dishonor the environment. That's royalty, believe it or not. I'm not talking to royalty like, even though you're a crack fiend, you're black, not that nonsense. But what I'm saying is that royalty is knowing that your desire doesn't have the leeway and the green light to destroy your name. No, it's your wounds don't have the right to govern your children. That's royalty. You see, your wounds can't govern your children. That reminds. I used to run a after school program. Did for years out in Newark, New Jersey, and I remember there was this woman. She clearly was on substance, and she used to come and pick up her daughter from the after. I think it was a daughter and a son, actually. It was two of them, and she was always on. She was always like the first one there, always on time. Picked them up on time. Always communicative if something was going on or whatever. And I could clearly see like she's out there. But when it came to those two children, she did not. She was where she was supposed to be every single, or Monday through Friday, there right where she was supposed to be. She didn't allow her womb to govern her children or her responsibilities for her children. So royalty is knowing that when you belong to a house, you don't get to drag the house into every public tantrum. You don't get to drag the house into every argument or, you know, every piece of unresolved resentment or every private confusion. That's what a lot of people miss about what real royalty is. It's not about being above correction. Like, you can't, don't say anything to me. I'm the king, or I'm the king. The reality is that royalty requires more correction than being common. There's a lot of self-correction. It's a lot of external correction when you move in like a royal person, because royalty is not about doing whatever you feel like doing. It's not about doing whatever you want. It requires a lot more restraint than that. You know, royalty is about not being worshipped, but it requires service. You doing way more service than what you're receiving. That's royal. That's how you earn your crown. You know, the higher the name that you have, the greater your discipline has to be. You see, that's in any organization that's ran properly. So people, sometimes I've had that happen. Oh, you think you just the boss? You the boss? Yeah, I am the boss. Yeah, I'm the boss. That means I'm the biggest servant. I'm the boss, right? And there's times I wish I wasn't. There's times I wish I was not Chief Yuya. Let me just be Yuya. Let me screw around like everybody else does and break the rules and do whatever I feel like. It's gonna be like, yeah, you know, I slipped, but I'm getting back on. You never heard me say anything like that. Because I'm not allowed to do that. I have to show a lot more restraint and control in that and discipline in that. You know, the greater your house is, this is House of Yuya, the more careful my conduct has to be as a result. It's the same thing with your crest. The more sacred your crest is, the more serious you have to be as the one who carries that crest. You see, that's why the house is so important. I don't want our people just to have cultural language. I want us to recover our dignity. That's what Anu has been about, like, this whole time. You always hear me say that. I mean, heck, I did a song called I Royal. So like, obviously royalty is a big thing. You know, it's the recovering of our dignity, not fake dignity, you know, like not like costume or social media dignity, not like that. But, you know, it's the dignity that changes how a man speaks to his children, you know, or how a woman carries herself inside of the house, you know, um, that sort of dignity that speaks about how a child understands their name, you know, um, when the family can say things like, hey, we don't behave like everything is common. You know, we don't get down like that, you know, because we ain't common, you know. You got to know that a serious woman, I'm going to talk to the women for, I know this has been a long live, but thanks for riding. You know, I think it's a very important subject. You got to know that a serious woman is not just asking whether a man is attractive. You know, she's not just asking if he can speak or does he have a certain look, a certain style, a certain sound or presence. A serious woman is listening for structure. You know, she's asking whether she can build under your vision. You know, if whether children can be formed in this space, you know, if whether there's protection here, if there's direction here, if there's restraint here, you know, she's asking whether the man can hold responsibility without falling into ego. That sometimes can be difficult for some guys. You give more responsibilities, like, you know, you're gonna do what I tell you to do, you know. And correction is gonna come, you know, that's normal. But can there be correction without cruelty? Can there be correction with love, you know? And can there be love without weakness? You know, um, Can you lead without insecurities? You know, um, she's listening for a man who can listen to the Most High above his own appetites. You know, I often wonder, sometimes I see certain relationships and I sit there and wonder, like, how'd you even let him climb on top of you? He doesn't have any discipline, you know. But I'm not a woman. I don't know stuff that, but some of the stuff that women like go for, I don't know. I I'm not a woman, so I don't know. But I'm like, yeah, I see some of these guys, they claim that they're spiritual, whatever, but they're ruled by their appetites, and that's who you let climb on you. You know, a woman should be thinking generationally and not just about choosing a man, but choosing an atmosphere, you know, that her children have to breathe. It's not, you know, the man, yeah, what atmosphere does the man make? You know, that's what's more important side of that. Can I function within that atmosphere? I guess my thing just dropped off, whatever. Um, that's not a small decision. You know, that's not even casual. That's something that you don't make through like, oh, we got good chemistry, or, you know, we're trauma bonding. Oh, you're lonely, I'm lonely. You know, you got desires, I got desires. A serious woman is going to ask things like, you know, am I helping to shape the future, or am I just reacting to the present? You know, um, am I bringing wisdom into this space, you know, or am I bringing unsolved wars? And sometimes they may be ancestral wars. You know, a woman should be a cultivator of peace. She's got to multiply that peace, you know, she's a multiplier, you know. But just like a man should be saying, am I able to lead? Am I able to build? You know, am I able to be corrected? You know, am I able to build with people without feeling the need to dominate the atmosphere? Right? Because we're supposed to be creating an atmosphere together, you know. Am I able to see children as an inheritance? See, children are not extensions of your own personal pain. They're inheritances, you know. The man might carry vision and headship and, you know, all those kind of things and direction, but the woman brings formation. A woman brings formation to those things. You know, a woman brings cultivation. She brings even a deep level of discernment. It's different. It's a different kind of discernment, you know. But one of the really important things that women bring is memory into the house. You need that. You need that. You need a woman who can bring memory into your house. You know, if the man is the one who carries the direction of the house, as he should, um, it's the woman who's going to determine whether that direction becomes livable, you know. And that's why the union of man and woman is so sacred. You know, it's not because it's easy, because a lot of times it ain't, you know, when we have to get through our own stuff, you know, our own trauma, um and people don't always behave honorably. That's, like I said, we got to be adults about it. You got to grow up, man. Like you know, people sometimes don't behave honorably. You know, not every man is fit. You know, not every woman has been prepared properly by her aunts and her mother and her grandmother and stuff. Most of the time, she's been poisoned. Nowadays, she's been poisoned by her aunts and her grandmother and her mama and her sisters and stuff like that. So you got to deal with that. But the reason it's so critical is because when a man and woman are rightly ordered under the creator, the child receives more than just their biology. You know, the child receives a whole world. That's what children are supposed to receive, not the world, our world. You see, a child is the future that's made visible to you. And that's why children are so dangerous to selfish adults, because a child forces time to become a real thing, you know. Um, Before a child, people can pretend that their decisions only belong to them. That's something you could do before you have a child. You know, they can say, this is my life. You know, I have to do what makes me happy. You know, it's nothing sickening when you hear that after a child. And again, I got it. This is a gender thing because men, we're never told that ever. Not a real man. We're always told do what's right. We grow up hearing that. Women are told do what makes you happy. If you ain't happy, girl, you got to do it, man. Hell no, not when there's a child involved. That's done. No, you got to do what's right. Do what's right. That should make you happy, unless something's evil inside of you, you know. But that whole "this is my life and I'm protecting my peace" BS that everyone talks about, you can see all those things and they sound wise when there's no child around. But you know, when there's a child standing in the middle of your decisions, you know, your moral equations have to change. You can't use the same moral math at that point because now all of the choices that you make, they have a witness. You know, your wounds have. I'm trying to read Master Malik's piece while I'm talking, but your wounds have a consequence beyond your own body now. You know, now your disorder has an heir. Here you go. Insecurity. Here you go. Let me put that in my will for you. You know, here's my insecurity. Here's my anger. Here you go. Here's my narcissism. Here you go. You know, here's my emotional immaturity. You know, that's why children have to be protected from adult confusion. You know, children shouldn't be hidden from the truth or lied to or raised inside of a fantasy. They should be protected from being forced to carry the instability of adults, you know, because sometimes a child will carry the instability of an adult before they even learn language, you know, before they have strength or they have the spiritual formation to even understand what the heck is happening. You know, children need order and they need rhythm and you know, the child needs a name, you know, children need father, children need their mother, they need correction, they need affection, you know, children need a sense. This is important. Children need to have a sense that the adults in their life are not improvising and just making it up as they go along. That's how you end up losing them. You know, that's where a lot of people fail. They love the idea of having children, of having a baby, and you know that the I can take pictures now. We got the baby picture. Look how cute we are. You know, there's public sentiment. Oh, look at y'all. Oh, the baby look just like you. Oh, the baby look just like the mama. Oh, the baby looks like the daddy. You know, and then there's language of legacy. Oh, that's gonna be a such as that. Watch, that's gonna be a, you know. But they don't love the discipline that's required to give a child a stable world. All the cuteness is there ain't none of that there, you know. There's discipline that's required to create a world for a child. And if we're serious about the future, we have to become serious about the child. Because like I said early on in this video, children are the ones who actually establish your community, you know. So not just like children in general, you know, or children as a talking point, but children as a sacred assignment from the Most High. You know, not just when your children, when they validate your identity. That's too common. You know, a community can't replace your house either. You know, I want to deal with that for a second. You know, I think that's an important piece. I have given much of my life to the community. You know, I started on this road of speaking to and waking up and helping my community when I was very young. And I do have faith in gathering. I do. You know, I have faith in spiritual family and institutions. And, you know, I do recognize teaching rites and order and sisterhood and brotherhood and study and correction and collective development. I'm advocates of all of that, but the community can't replace the house. No matter how much work I do, it can't replace the house. The community can support the house. Absolutely. You know, the community can correct the house even and can provide witnesses for the house, you know, and elders and teachers and guides and examples and things like that. But it can't become a substitute for adults refusing to build a stable family order. All that, it takes a village to raise. No, it don't. It takes two parents. That's it. Don't take no freaking. That's people trying to pass off their responsibilities and run from the dysfunction. I couldn't get along with the mother, but it take a village. My mother helps me out with the baby. Stop that nonsense. You know, a community is made up of, when it's made up of unstable houses, it will eventually become an unstable community. That's why so many movements fall apart, because it's not always because the doctrine was the problem, the doctrine is weak, you know, or because some outside enemy attacked them, you know, or they didn't have resources. A lot of times people just brought too much ungoverned house disorder into the public work, you know, and a man who is disorderly in his house will eventually lead a disorderly community. You know, it's inevitable, you know. Oh, don't worry about that. That's my lights. But children who are formed in that sort of space, you know, will eventually have to be managed by the community when they're not formed at home, right? We can't keep trying to build public institutions with people who have refused formation in private, you see. So I'm going to use that light going off as mine, because I had some more I wanted to build on. I think I'm going to have to do a part 2. I'm not going to turn the light back on. But, but yeah, I think I'm going to do a part 2 on this. So willfully, because this went longer than I expected. But there's a lot to this, to really restoring the dignity in the family structure. You know, I wanted to get into culture, you know, and how sometimes culture can become a performance. Spirituality can become a performance, ancestral language, and even sometimes family becomes a performance, unfortunately. You know, a person can speak beautifully about ancestors and still be impossible to build with, you know. But we're going to talk about that. All right. So I want to thank all of you for tuning into the live. This has been Chief Yuya. Definitely check out the House of Yuya, which is my other page, you know. You see me sitting here in the dark. Maybe I should just turn the light back on. But nah, man, this has been long enough. It's a smart light. I could just turn it on from right here, but I don't feel like doing it. I should be more professional and just turn the damn light on. I mean the darn light on, excuse my language. But anyway, what was I saying? So yeah, man, like a lot of this, you know, goes into just performance, and people get kind of caught into the performance of, like I said, whether it's royalty or the performance of the home, and they miss out on a lot of what is supposed to be to form nations and to form properly formed children, right? It's like, all right. I'm still going to just do it. I'm still going to just come back to a part 2 still, though, because I got a lot that I want to build on this, you know. But you can talk about divine feminine and divine masculine and all of those different things. But and I lost my chat. I'm trying to get back to the YouTube chat. Oh, of course it's low. Yeah, part 2. Yeah, part 2. Yeah. You know, we just have to ask some better questions, man. You know, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more, you know. But I want to thank you for tuning in. We'll do a part 2 because there's a lot to unpack. I really would like to see more homes, more houses being built, more families being built. And at least in prior to that, I need to see you brothers starting to build those houses inside of you, because that's where it begins, man. I don't really want to hear about anything else. I'm not really interested in anything else y'all got to say. I'm sorry. I'm at the age now to talk like that, man. Like, I don't want to hear about you trying to get out of your car lease, or, you know, you whatever. Build a house inside of you. We need kings, and we need you to produce some princes and some princesses, and to raise up some queens. That's what's needed, you know, more than you starting your freaking flower delivery service business. Like, we'll get to that later. All right. So anyway, thank you so much for tuning in, and willfully you got something out of this live that you can process. And like I said, make sure you're following the House of Yuya channel as well. I'm going to be having some new stuff coming on over there as well, dealing with building houses. All right. So we'll do a part 2, maybe next strong, or maybe in a couple of days. We'll see how the rhythm is. All right. But until such time, be well. Shabbat shalom. Peace.